Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about things that we're interested in digital media production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to be kicking off a series that really talks about project management. So they're going to have we have a group of real experts in our midst. They're going to be talking about project management and the tools and the processes that you need to understand as you kind of scale up some of your projects. So stay tuned for that in the second hour. If you've got questions about that around the tools or project management in general, go ahead and throw those into Makana for the second hour. And let's go ahead and jump into the questions for the first hour. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Matthias Utila in Helsinki, Finland. And Matthias says, as a small production company, having a Zoom Pro license does not give us all the benefits of using Zoom ISO. Mainly, the meeting resolution limits to 720 instead of 1080. Any ideas on how to get 1080 without purchasing 10 licenses?
Go, Jason.
Absolutely. The great news is that you don't need 10 licenses. You just need to demonstrate a need for higher resolution. So reach out to your Zoom rep and give them a sense of how you intend to use it, and you should be pretty locked in for a better resolution. They can fix that pretty fast.
Without paying for the business licenses, then and that is a minimum of 10. It is a harder road. So just know that it's not going to be just you can just say I need 1080. You really have to make a good business case for why you need 1080. So that just keep that in mind. The 10 licenses get it to you pretty automatically. I've heard of people being able to whittle folks down to 5 licenses, et cetera. But that really depends on who you're talking to. Hopefully, Zoom is going to fix this. Right now, if you have a Zoom Pro license, all you have to do is say, I need 720, and they just don't give it to everyone automatically, but they will give it to you automatically if you ask. So you don't get it out of the gate, but you get it you get it if you ask for it. I think that the Zoom needs to push this forward faster. I think part of when we say, I don't want to be in another Zoom call, I don't want to do my event over Zoom, I don't want to have more meetings over Zoom, I think subconsciously people are reacting to that lower resolution, and I think it would really benefit our industry and meetings in general if we started moving to at least 720 for everyone, and then being able to request 1080. Hopefully, Zoom will think about that harder. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas comes up next. What is the current state of the art with WordPress relating to themes, plugins, and using AI for automated content creation and updating?
Go ahead, John.
Tons of plugin tools out there. I would say at least 90% of those tools are nothing more than an API into OpenAI's 3.5 version of the model. And so I just use OpenAI directly. My guess is that WordPress is going to integrate AI direct link right into the code, but I haven't seen anything magical out there. I use the Avada theme, which is one of the best themes on the marketplace. And so I just do it the old fashioned way. I've built hundreds of WordPress sites in the last 10 years.
Go ahead, Brett.
I agree with John. And if it's a set it and forget it website, there are plenty of plugins and themes that'll allow you to generate content. But if it's for a business or an organization, SEO is a big concern, and you don't want your content to be flagged as AI, and you don't want Google to ignore it because it's AI. So the best thing to do, like John said, is just use OpenAI and ChatGPT directly and put your content in. But if it's set it and forget it, just make sure that you're using a reputable theme from a reputable theme developer or plugin developer, because some of them really are a cash grab when people don't realize that you can get OpenAI or OpenAI Pro for $20 and not have to pay on top of that just to have content generated.
Next question.
Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. Up next, has anyone tried an aftermarket self-driving add-on like the Comma 3X with OpenPilot? And he's got a link to it.
Go ahead, John.
Well, this is a great question. I have not tried it, but this company, Comma, was founded by George Hotz. George Hotz is a superstar in the coding and hacking community, and they're in San Diego, and they just had their convention, which is called Comic-Con, and it's in San Diego. Bill, isn't that funny?
No conflict there.
Where they announced the 3X, which just came out. But George is an amazing guy. I watch him. He does the 6-7 hour YouTube videos where he codes the whole thing. He's an amazing guy. And he says his stuff is one step behind Tesla. But for $1,200, it looks like a decent product.
How does it control the car?
It plugs into the OBD port.
But it looks like it says lane centering and so on and so forth. Like
they can control steering through the ODBB, whatever that port's called. They can control steering through that port.
I'm afraid that there's a little bit in my head
scary.
of like what could possibly go wrong. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I looked at it. It works through the CAN bus, and I have a car that would qualify. It works with over 250 different cars that have basically the that you'll see in most safety packages, like in my Kia Niro plug-in hybrid, that has, if it has digital lane keeping, which means it can control the steering, and if it has automatic braking and adaptive cruise control, where it can control the accelerator, and it ties into the camera system that's on the front, the vision system. But this apparently has its own set of cameras, about $1,200, or you can license it for $113 a month. It looks like. And it has 3 cameras, has an infrared camera that watches you inside the car, and it has 2 cameras that face forward. It looks like it's built on a cell phone platform of some sort. But it has on storage, 3 cameras, a Snapdragon processor. It looks an awful lot like an Android phone. It then has a harness of wires that tie into the CAN bus, through the OBD port. It would be fairly scary for me. Tesla has enough problems with running into things in their full auto driving, and I looked at some of the videos on this, and the only videos it showed was on highway type driving. It didn't show any city type driving, with stop signs and stoplights and pedestrians, things like that kind of get in your way.
I do feel like we would have a lot more really great solutions if we just focused on the highway, because the highway is the worst. I mean, the 405 or the 101 or whatever, the highway, the city driving, I don't need the auto driving to work. I mean, I'll drive that part. I just want to, when I get into the highway, I want to say, okay, you take over. I'm going to go take a nap. I haven't done that yet, but that's my dream, is like, I'm going to get on the 5 to go to LA. I did that last week. And I would have loved to, go to sleep on the 5 from about the Grapevine to where we get to Livermore. Like that section is like 4 hours of just oof.
Well, anyway. Apparently, it does not disable the warning system that's at least built into my Kia that makes you touch the steering wheel every 30 seconds. No,
I'm saying, I'm not saying I would use this one. I'm just saying that's the dream, not that I would actually do it. I don't think I could sleep thinking that the car was driving. I know some people have proven that they can, but I couldn't. I don't think I could do that right anytime soon. Go ahead, Bill.
I don't know why, but I saw the ad harness for $150, and I thought, what? You have to update your seatbelt rig? What? It just didn't seem safe at all. And maybe that's just the way you word things, but that's scary.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from CJ Koval in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. What color profile should I use when sending a Mac to an ATEM? I've been through every color profile and system prefs and run display calibrator, but no luck. Image is washed out. White point is okay.
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay. I think this doesn't actually have to do with the color profile. In fact, has to do with your handshake. So, I've got a few monitors plugged in here, and I'm selecting the Blackmagic HDMI, and macOS is automatically choosing the color profile BMD HDMI that was loaded automatically. So I think something may be wrong with HDMI. Also, go into Preferences, so Command comma from your ATEM app, and be sure that you've got none, not generic, but none selected there. And then your colors should look just fine.
Yeah, another thing to think about is how the way I've done it when I really needed the colors to be very close to correct is the way you want to think about, I have a Spider. It's a Spider Elite. And the way it works is that I have a computer here, and then it's going to go out to the monitor. But what I can do is put the switcher in between it, right? So I can put the switcher in between that monitor. Now, you're double correcting, so you got to make sure that the monitor is correct. But the what you can do is run through it, put the spider here, run back to the computer, and what it's going to do is it's going to correct for what it sees on the way through. So because the spider doesn't know what was between the computer and the monitor, it just knows that that's there. Now you're correcting for the switcher and the monitor when you do this, but it'll create a profile that will at least look good on the monitor that you have, and then you have to look at the stream and see if that lines up. The big problem you have with monitors in general is that it's never quite the same color. That's why we used to call it NTSC, never the same color. So you just have to kind of think through that double correction process, but that might get you a little closer too. Next question.
Matthias Utia in Helsinki, Finland. We need a real-time transcription in live stream. What ways panelists can recommend to execute this, and any recommended services? Alternately, if an event is held in Zoom, is there easier built-in tools for doing this?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, so I've been doing translation, not real-time, but I'm still never found anything that gets anywhere close to what I need in terms of a realistic translation that could happen in real time. And the reason I say that is that the best of them have 99 point something accuracy, but that means that you're going to get a word wrong or something every 100 words. And while they've gotten incredibly better, it used to be the big problem of there, and there, how you spell it, and the fact that it couldn't figure out which word is word. It does a lot of those kind of heuristic things really well now, all the translations, but they still have trouble. So if you're purely, I watch sometimes like news captioning that is being done in real time, and the fact that they go wrong so often, I think is part because people speak in odd cadences and they diverge from the original thought, and that we don't speak cleanly. So when you're trying to transcribe it, it's really helpful to have a human brain behind that. So I don't trust anything to do translation if it needs to be right, other than an actual person. And that unfortunately means no real time. That's just how I look at it.
Yeah, the tools have gotten pretty good. 99% is pretty optimistic. It's usually, even with a human, probably at 96%. And then we find that a lot of the tools up in the past have been between 92 and 96%. I think that a lot of times, this is still something that does make a huge difference for people, even if it's not 100%. And people will, the main thing is you always have to prepare people, because people will complain about it, and they especially complain about it if you change the language, because it'll never get the language perfectly right. It's much closer to 80% of what everyone will agree on is the right translation of that thing. But if you're looking for real-time translation, Zoom, of course, built it in, so it'll just pop up. Bing, or the Teams and Meet will also do it internally. But if you really want to put it up there as a separate element, so really as true captions, you're really looking at AI Media /EEG. So they build the tools that are going to give you. They're going to properly insert the text data into the VANC information inside of a video signal, and then that's going to be able to pass it through. So line 21 inside of there is going to pass that data through. That's going to show up in an encoder. That's how TV makes those captions work. And so those are the ones that there's hardware to do that. There's also some software that can bring that on as a sidecar. The product you're looking for is Lexi. Lexi is their product that will do this automatically, and it's used in a lot of events that I work on. Of course, a stenographer is always going to be, in my opinion, better, as Bill said. So having a stenographer there that is feeding that into, they're going to be using a variety of different systems that might Eclipses, ProCap, so on and so forth. And then they'll pass that out. Now, if you're looking for a separate screen, you may be looking for something like StreamText. StreamText is the software, is a web cloud that will connect an Eclipse that a stenographer might be using, or Lexi, into many, many different outputs. It can send it to YouTube. It can send it to something else. It can also send it to what we call CART, which is a full screen version of those things. But so those are the things, StreamText, but specifically AI Media is probably, we've had them on the show. We'll probably bring them back on to do Q&A. But they're the ones that are kind of the industry leader in that area. And they're used for a lot of events and a lot of broadcasts. But I think most stuff you see on broadcast is a person doing it. It's not an automatic version of that. There's some legal requirements for those things right now. Next question. Sorry.
Next one comes from Eric.
I'm spending so much time being a panelist, at different times. And then I just finished my question. I'm expecting someone else to talk. Anyway, next question.
I know it's a problem. Eric Hertz in Hartford, Connecticut. Sorry about that. Would you recommend NDI Bridge as a replacement for SRT for remote contribution?
No. I would stick with SRT. So there, okay.
I love a
that'd be
definitive answer.
I worked on projects where we're using NDI as a contribution method from the edge to the core, and I have not found it to be particularly stable. So there's just a lot of tweaking, and it never came out. And SRT is a pretty stable platform to do that in. So I would recommend sticking with an SRT contribution. Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, discussed the concept of global artificial scarcity. Who does this? Apple, luxury products, and he's got a link there to explore.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, artificial scarcity is the idea that a firm or organization doesn't produce the maximum number of units, and they do that in order to decrease the supply so that prices go up. The problem with this idea is that it doesn't stand up to the laws of supply and demand, especially in competitive markets. What you're talking about, Paul, is there are some luxury goods that as the demand or as the price increases, the demand also increases. That's called a Veblen good. Apple does not produce Veblen goods. That's things like those purses you see for $60,000 or a watch for $150,000. Those are goods that as the price increases, they become more desirable. Apple exists in what's called a monopolistically competitive market, which if you want to do some YouTube videos on that, basically what it means is Apple's incentivized to produce the most that they can at the lowest price. And over time, they'll always produce what they can at their lowest price.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, what John said. Basically, I agree with most of that. You do find it mainly in luxury products because scarcity implies, hand craftsmanship, a lot of higher level of value or craftsmanship, and scarcity imply, this is done with a lot of collectibles. They will limit things who make collectibles do a limited run, serigraphs or copies of paintings. They'll run a numbered series to make them more valuable. But any type of luxury item or collectible, the whole idea is the scarcity makes their value greater. And NFTs was the same deal.
Good, Bill.
I've worked a little bit on the other end of this, which is oversupply, and it's scary sometimes. When I was working in that, I had a client at one point called Bargain Land that took manufacturer overruns and put them on. They had thousands of eBay auctions running all the time, and everything on there started at 1 cent, and they bid up from there, and whatever it eventually went for, it went for. But the point was, we used to get pallets and pallets into the warehouse of manufacturer overruns where they thought the market was 300,000 units, using their best thing, and they sold 8,000. And so you have this massive overrun of stuff that has to go somewhere. And over again, I saw that happen with products that even from large manufacturers who just bet wrong on how popular that product was going to be. So artificial scarcity is on one end of it, and I understand what you're talking about. But on the other end is this horrible artificial oversupply by just bad planning and not being able to do it to meet the market just in time or something like that, and having to massively ramp up on a product that doesn't find a market.
Yeah, and the other side of that is a lot of times people do just in time, where they just build things as they're being ordered to make sure that they don't have that overrun. The problem is that you end up with COVID, and suddenly nothing can move around, and they can't sell anything. so that not having a little bit in the back end becomes more problematic. Go ahead, John.
Supply chain is not easy.
Yeah, it is. Right, exactly. Go ahead, John.
I want to know who wrote this article, Paul, because it's posted up on WordPress, and I thought this was one of your domains that you have, and I want to know who Scott, the author, is. Let me know on Discord.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, there's two brands that I can think of that are a perfect example. Is Hermes. There was quite a phenomenon with the Birkin bag, $20,000 bag. It was not even a matter of money. They are looking for specific types of customers. You can't just walk in and say, I want to buy this bag. So you have to look a certain way, talk a certain way. Ferrari too, they want a certain type of customer. Even if you have a money for a Ferrari, they're not just going to take your money and give you a car. So those are two perfect examples of companies that they want to maintain a specific brand, a specific type of clientele.
Yeah, and the real challenge with doing artificial scarcity is that it builds up either what we call demand destruction, which means that you make it so expensive that people just don't want it anymore. They find some other solution. So, a good example is our oil is an artificial. We have an artificial cap on oil, and that's created by OPEC. And so OPEC creates an artificial scarcity. They are not producing as much as they could. If they did, the price would drop and they wouldn't make any money on those barrels of oil. So they put it out at a certain rate that makes the most sense, the most profit for them. But when they do that, of course, they create, basically if the gas prices get too high, then people buy more electric cars, or they change their behavior and say, well, I don't want to drive as much. I don't want to do those road trips. I don't want to do these other things. And so their behavior changes, and behavior changes are super hard to change again. So if someone goes away from your product, it becomes really hard. Another good example is diamonds. Diamonds are worth about glass. There's so many diamonds that are out there. They're worth a little bit more than glass. And De Beers keeps a very tight control over the diamond supply. There's they cemented a whole beach in Namibia because if their diamonds were in the sand. And so they make sure that supply stays short, but they've created a high. Basically, Bezos, Jeff Bezos was the best to say this margin here between what diamonds are actually worth and what they're selling diamonds for. Your margin is my opportunity, and so when you have competitive markets there, what happens now is we have artificial diamonds that are basically going to replace natural diamonds. And the artificial diamonds are identical to the natural diamonds, except they're not connected to they're not blood diamonds, and they are actually becoming more pure. And that artificial control and pushing that price up basically created that market over 30 years. I mean, I remember reading the first article about man-made diamonds in like the 80s in Wired magazine, and now they're becoming normal. Like I'm seeing ads for them on TikTok, that will slowly replace natural diamonds because they don't have any of the cultural baggage that the natural diamonds do, and they're exactly the same. So that's the kind of thing that was created by a artificial constraint on a market, and it's also why we want to try to keep people away from monopolies because if they have monopolies, they can do this all the time. A good example is LVMH. So next question.
David Brady in New York City says, using my MacBook Air M2 in a docked mode while at the office, are there any Apple certified outboard fingerprint readers on the market?
Go ahead, Alex.
Historically, a lot of these fingerprint readers have not been very secure in my experience. I haven't looked recently, but on a Mac, what I would suggest doing, it's a rather expensive solution, but Apple's own Magic Trackpad keyboard has a Touch ID sensor on it. I'm using one right now and it works really great.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, if you're referring to a fingerprint reader, then yeah, you can get them, and they're a terrible idea. If you are actually looking to integrate with the Touch ID system, which ties into the Secure Enclave system, which is not the same as an optical fingerprint reader, then yeah, you need to get a keyboard, you need to get an Apple Watch, you need to get something that Apple has manufactured, which actually ties directly in, and I'm unaware of a way to thwart that.
Go ahead, Brett.
I do recall that Jason Snell on MacBreak Weekly bolted a spare Magic Keyboard under his desk, almost like a panic button. And that, it did the trick. But then I think he even 3D printed something to like make a little case after he deconstructed the keyboard to just have the fingerprint reader. So I would look, it might be on YouTube. Or just look back in MacBreak Weekly episodes.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Alex, your camera seems to be a bit more exposed than usual. Did you change your settings?
Ninja eyes there, paying attention to my camera. So I have a new camera. This is actually, it looks pretty similar to the old camera. I'm using a ZVE10. I'm trying to experiment with less expensive versions of how to make this work. So this is a ZVE10. Instead of being, I think, $1,800, which is what the FX30 is, which I still have, it is about $700. And so, it cuts the price down by more than half. For when we think about, a lot of times when I'm doing this, I'm trying to figure out kits, how to make a kit work and what will we do to make it work and so on and so forth. And so my attempt is to get a cheaper solution that we can use for our kits that still looks good. So this is the same sensor size. And I'm using actually the same 1.4 lens, so it works pretty well. I do have a 1.8 lens coming that I'm going to try that's much smaller and much less expensive. Again, I'm trying to get down. My goal has been to get as close to $1,000 for this kit as, for this camera kit as possible and still have that Super 35 look. So the problem that I'm having right now is that I cannot reliably pair to the camera. So I can do it if I walk all the way around and I look at the QR code and I type it back in and I walk back over. Then when I close my app, it goes away and it's not connecting reliably through Wi-Fi. So it's probably a setting on the camera. Like I just need to keep on looking at. I'd figured that out. So I haven't quite figured it out yet. So when I get it set early in the morning, it's sometimes a little off. Interestingly enough, on my monitors, it looks like it's a high, but it doesn't look like it's peaking. But it may look like that in Zoom. So anyway, so I'm going to probably I'm still working on that little handshake, but it's a good little camera. It's not a camera that I'd want to do any production with. The micro HDMI frightens me a little bit. It's a very, very small camera. And so I find that to be kind of interesting. I could possibly use it as an overhead or something like that. But, I'm trying to figure out also, the idea is that my FX30 was getting kind of tied up by being a webcam. And I was like, it'd be good to use that and be able to shoot with it somewhere other than that, because we use it for the event coverage. And I got to start working on the LUTs that as they tie into YouTube. And so I needed that camera, and taking it on and off every morning is not something I'm super excited about. So anyway, that's the long story about what happened with the camera. But it is a new camera, and I'm pretty happy with it. And still, the focus isn't quite as good as it's a little bit slower than the FX30, and it feels more abrupt. It's not as smooth as the FX30, but overall, it's a pretty good camera. Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Chrome keeps popping up with this message on my Mac M1 running Sonoma. Make Chrome faster. Memory Saver frees up memory from inactive tabs so it can be used by active tabs and other apps. Where is this coming from, and is it a good or a bad idea?
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think anytime you use a browser, especially Chrome, it uses up a lot of resources on the computer. So I think Chrome has finally come up with a solution by allowing the resources to go away from tabs you're not using. What I typically do is just don't open that many tabs because it gets hard to read the tabs and you get a little confused as to what tab is where. But that just kind of helps keep the resources easy. So I would have thought Chrome would have just built it in. But
go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, Safari has been a lot more stable in that respect with memory management. But I've been testing this feature because I have to use a Windows 10 PC at work, and it has actually made a significant impact. So if you're the kind of person like me that has about 50 or 60 tabs open at any time in Chrome, then yes, it is a good idea to turn it on. You will see a reduction in memory used on your computer. So just try it out.
Okay, Courtney.
Yeah, it depends on whether it's a good or a bad idea. It depends on your method of working. If you're constantly switching back and forth between tabs, it may slow you down a little bit, because what it does is to free up resources, it just keeps the current version of a page that a tab is assigned to. So it does not refresh that page continuously. And if you've got a busy page that has lots of ads, or a news page that is constantly updating with video and animated ads and everything else, all that stuff is staying up to date on the not currently the forward-facing tab. So what it does is it just turns off the updates for all the tabs that are not being used, or at least not the top 4 tabs or something that are not being used. So it's not doing as much bandwidth in the background by updating all those off-screen tabs. And then when you select that tab, it will then do a refresh. So when you select that tab, it'll take a little bit longer for that page to update and refresh. It won't be instantaneous. So if that's your way of working, constantly going back and forth between a lot of tabs frequently, then it may slow you down. If you don't go back and forth, it'll save a lot of resources and let you run more programs other than the browser.
And go, Jason.
My immediate thought was, how many tabs do you have open, Paul? And you clearly need to buy a Mac Pro for at least $13,000 to be sure that you can support your Chrome habit.
I shut my Chrome, I shut my browser all the time. Like I save the things that I want to save, and I shut it all the time to make sure that I don't start building up tabs. So I never have probably more than 5 or 6 tabs open at any given time. Quick reminder that, of course, this is a good time to ask questions. You can ask questions in Mokana. For general questions, you can ask them in the right now in Mokana for the first hour, general questions. And then, of course, if you have questions about project management, go ahead and throw those in for the second hour. And make sure to vote on those questions so that we know what order you'd like us to ask them. Next question.
Alexander Knight in Vancouver, British Columbia. I installed a Tiffin variable ND filter onto my main camera. However, when I put the dust lens on, the outer ring moves ever so slightly, which is quite annoying. Other than tapping it, any other solutions?
Go ahead, Jason.
This is the built-in hazard of a variable ND filter. What you can do is get fixed ND filters and put them behind the lens instead of in front of them. But other than that, no, this is just one of those issues that's kind of built into a variable ND.
Go ahead, Courtney.
2 words for you, Alexander. Grape jelly. I find that grape jelly is the universal slow down everything substance. And if you just smear a little grape jelly between the 2 rotating polarizing filters, not on the filter itself, but just on the ring, it will goo it up just enough so that when you touch it, you're not going to bump it.
This started because Courtney was using his lens right after lunch, and it was an accidental discovery of like, oh no, I got grape jelly on it. Oh wait, it works better.
I'm serious. I actually discovered this because I used to have printers that the feed rollers would dry out after a number of years. And I found that.
But the grape jelly never dries out.
That's grape jelly. Haven't you ever found a piece of grape jelly underneath a shelf or something that's been sitting there for a year?
No,
and
never.
It's still sticky.
No. Go ahead, Jason.
Grape jelly. I'm just saying. It's the universal.
Okay. I'm going to give you a commercial version of grape jelly. There is a temporary version of Loctite. And if you take the tiniest amount of temporary Loctite and put it on the inside of the thread, you might be able to immobilize it just enough, but you're running the risk of hurting it.
Good, Bill.
Avery has little tiny dots. That's what I used to use when I had a problem with something that needed to be set someplace. I'd set it and I'd put 3 at the third points around the lens, and they can be peeled off later, but it'll give you at least more stability in terms of the movement of the filter.
And I don't use variable filters. So I just have a set of them at different heights, and I replace them at it. The polarization can sometimes change the nature of people's faces, their skin. And so as a result, I don't use anything that has polarization if I'm shooting people. So anyway, I don't use the variable filters. I just use regular ND filters. I have a little kit of them that I can put them on in that from, I think it's 0.5 to 3 stops, I believe, or maybe no. I think I have one that's up to 9 stops. That's there, but that's how I kind of approach that. Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway. Regarding live transcriptions, can YouTube receive captions for a live stream in real time without burning it into the video feed? If so, how's it done?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. So what you have to do is you have to do 608, 708 captioning. Again, this is inserting that into the video signal. So in your encoder, there's a couple things that have to happen to have that happen, to be able to do that. Your encoder, whatever that encoder is, has to be able to read line 21 or the VANC data. And you have to have not lost it by running it through something like a switcher. So like a Blackmagic switcher uses that VANC data to talk to the cameras. That's how they figured out how to talk to cameras. So you have to be very careful of it. Has to come right at the very end. Now, typically we use an EEG 492. A 492 is going to insert that data, insert the captioning data into that right before it goes to the encoder. The encoder then is going to receive that video signal with that captioning in it, and then YouTube knows how to read that. So if your encoder is set up to encode captioning, it will send that stream to YouTube, and YouTube will read it, and so will Facebook and kind of Twitter. Well, back when Twitter did it, Twitter would put it like 4 lines on for one side. Didn't work very well. But Facebook, YouTube can definitely read that 608, 708 data, and you just need to make sure you're inserting it in the right place right at the very end. I think that things like Wirecast can can see it, but I've never done it with a software encoder. I've always done it with hardware encoders. So something like the Elemental links, which we use here, the Elemental encoders, the 023s and 031s and 600 and 700 series, 800 series, will all read them. So mostly my experience has been mostly hardware encoders being able to read those and then pass them into YouTube or almost any other platform. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. What does the panel recommend for sturdy keyboard and musical equipment stands? I know the German Jaspers brand is a solid choice, but there aren't any U.S. dealers.
Go ahead, Alex.
I always go to Koenig and Meyer, or as many people know them as K&M stands. They're a German company. They are really solid steel, really great components, and I've never had any issues. They are more expensive than a lot of the cheaper off-brand knockoffs, and they do have U.S. dealers. I'm sure you can get them at B&H or Sweetwater as well.
Next question.
Eric Hertz in Hartford, Connecticut says, you mentioned using an AWS Elemental link to send the program to remote servers. Do you ever have a use case to send the program as SRT to a remote location? And if so, what do you use to send the SRT signal?
There's a lot of things that'll do SRT pass, that will send those. So, OBS will do that, and many other things will encode into SRT to be able to send those signals over. So, I also things like I think most of the hardware switchers, not hardware switchers, but like the TriCaster and other things will do SRT. I have to admit, I still use the link. I take it to AWS and then pass it SRT back to something else. Now, there's a long delay there, so there's a lot more latency to do it that way. But I don't, and I admit that I don't use SRT a ton. Most of the time we're passing things around internally, and we send it to the cloud to move those. But you can do SRT as well. I think from the LiveView, you can using LiveView Central, you can have your LiveView go into the cloud and then convert it to SRT. So SRT inside of the Elemental cloud is a pretty known subject. So it's just a matter of using Media Connect and Media Live to basically package those up as SRTs to send them out. Larix is another one that you can send directly from a phone. So Larix will allow you to encode from a phone directly into SRT. And also, I believe Stream Voodoo will do it as well. So it'll encode those to SRT. So those are a couple SRT solutions. Next question.
And Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas notes, TV of the year costs $1,300 on Amazon for a 55-inch class OLED S90C. I think this is from Samsung. Too good to pass up, and open boxes around $1,000.
Go ahead, Brett.
Looks like a beautiful screen, and it has nice 4K upscaling, and the price is nice for an OLED. I would say my only real complaint is Samsung's latest TVs have ads in the operating system, which drive me crazy. So if that is a deal breaker for you.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I'd be very careful about an open box with an OLED because of burn-in. You don't know where it's been or how long it's been there and what's been displayed on it. If it's a display model, it's been sitting on the shelf with a logo down at the bottom. It could have that logo permanently burned in on it. So I'd be very careful about an open box. Samsung makes very good OLEDs. I think they come from LG, the panels do. But I'd go the mini LED QLED, which is what I went for when I was last shopping for TVs from Samsung, with adaptive brightness on the backlight with the mini LEDs. Gives you a much brighter image than the OLED does. So if you're going to be putting this TV in a room that gets a lot of daylight, has a lot of windows in it, you might find the OLED, which has beautiful blacks in a dark room, may not have enough oomph for you to see things clearly in a brightly lit room. So take that into consideration.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to say, I've noticed that I am spending less and less time in my living room in front of the bigger TV. Now, everybody's habits will be different. If I was still in the family area of my life, maybe all of us gathering together and watching stuff in the evening would be a perfect use for that. But more and more, my wife and I tend to watch things at dinner time together. We enjoy that time together, but then we split off and I end up watching on a phone or an iPad or something else. And that behavior pattern, I think, is going to continue because it's more convenient. In fact, just last night, the dog came up and gave me that look that says, I want to go lay in the sun a little bit, or lay outside on the patio. So I was able to take the content that I was watching, put it on pause for just a second, walk out with him, move to a different location, restart it up, and it didn't interrupt my viewing enjoyment of the show I was watching, but it was more flexible. You can't really do that with a big TV in the living room, so I'm just finding more flexibility. I'm spending more time with smaller personal screens, less time with the big screen in the living room. So I'm probably going to invest less in that as I go forward. That's just how I find it.
On the other end, I don't like buying a TV at 55 inches. If I need it to be minimum 75 if I'm going to use it to watch content. So 75 inches is kind of my, we use 55 inches as kind of like utilitarian monitors to put in places, but I wouldn't use it, like we use them for multi-views and stuff like that and to see stuff, but I wouldn't put a 55 inch in a living room, from my perspective. So, so that's what I would think of there. I also wouldn't buy anything that didn't say Dolby Vision on it. Like, I don't think this one has, I looked at the spec. I don't see Dolby Vision showing up. Samsung doesn't like paying for the licensing. The problem is that Dolby really pays attention to the entire pipeline. They're managing an entire pipeline from cradle to grave. And that's what, HDR10 Plus, which is probably what Samsung HDR10 Plus is Samsung saying, I don't want to pay the licensing for Dolby. But I think that supporting a pipeline that is actually being curated is important, for getting good quality out. So I wouldn't buy a monitor that didn't say Dolby Vision, at least say Dolby Vision on it. It may not be the perfect Dolby Vision. Specifically, if you're looking for a good monitor, you're looking for Dolby Vision IQ. Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What are the potential legal repercussions of using a service like YellowDuck.tv for live streams? Is there a distinction between the potential outcomes versus the likely outcomes of the terms of service violations?
Go, Jason.
Yeah, the potential downside is they can pull your stream. I don't think there would really be legal action unless you're rebroadcasting copyrighted material.
Yeah, people use it all the time. It's not so. This is part of the. So for those listening, don't know what this is related to. This is typically related to streaming to Instagram. Now, there's other ways to do that in a way that doesn't break the TOS. I believe the YOLO box is doing it, because what the YOLO box is doing, the YOLO box streaming box is entering Instagram as an Android phone. And then it's passing video into it, in a professional way. So it's, instead of having the phone camera, it says, oh, I got an HDMI for the camera. So technically the YOLO box doesn't break the terms of service. Whereas if you use YellowDuck and you're basically using YellowDuck to grab onto the RTMP input, then you are breaking that TOS. I have seen them put their thumb down on certain streams, but generally I've only seen it once or twice out of, everybody who wants to stream something professional to Instagram uses YellowDuck. So, but the YOLO box again has been picking up speed in that area. There's no legal repercussion. Facebook's not going to come after you, or Instagram's not going to come after you for doing it. The legal repercussions are you're doing something for a client and the stream ends, and then you have to explain to them why the stream ended. So for the most high-profile things that we've done, we've tried to stay inside of the TOS, which means we're either using phones. We shoot a screen with a phone, which is still legal, but we can do a full production in it. And that's it takes like half a day or a day to get set up, because you have to tune the phone perfectly with a tent and line it up and everything else. But you can do that. And we've taken ones where we've taken satellite production into our office and then pumped it through a phone through the screen and had it just look like it was just being shot into Instagram. So you can do that as well. But again, I think probably the most stable way to get into Instagram these days is the YOLO box. It's not perfectly stable, but it's the most stable way without breaking TOS. Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. When planning for travel with a Pelican case, what's your strategy for packing that minimizes checked baggage?
Go ahead, Bill.
My oddest habit, and this is one I learned really early, I have a little handheld scale that straps on a handle of a piece of luggage. And the reason I say that is because you're trying to pack for travel. The thing I've messed up on most is weight, particularly if I'm trying to get the minimum number of bags. And I've gone over 50 pounds more times than I can tell you. And when you do that, unless you're traveling on a press pass or something like that, puts you in a whole different category, and they can really snag you in terms of extra charges. So I have found myself, sadly, too many times on my knees at airport check-ins trying to redistribute weight among 3 Pelican cases to get one of them below the 50-pound thing so that I don't get snapped with an extra couple $100 for traveling with it. Packing deserves its whole second hour. Travel is complex, and it is not getting any easier in my experience out there.
Good, Courtney?
Yeah, as Bill said, the weight thing is how the airlines stab you for extra money. Is if it's over 50 pounds. It used to be 75 pounds, so you could get away with a lot. The problem with Pelican cases and ATA-rated cases that are plywood and ABS plastic are the cases themselves weigh about 30 pounds in some cases. So depending upon what you're putting in it, you're going to go over that 50-pound limit pretty quickly, and the rates just go up astronomically. It's not linear. The rate goes up, like 4 pounds over, it goes to this price, and then that price doubles again. The extra price doubles again for like an ounce over that next tier level of overweight. So be very careful about weight. You might want to check and see if you have Pelican Air cases, which is more of a foamed polyethylene than the strict molded polyethylene. So it's it's about 20% lighter. Sorry if you hear the honking horn.
Yep.
But anyway,
the first thing I do is that, I'm going to carry on the things that I have to make sure that I can do my show with whatever I carry on. That's usually in my head. Like I could do a show. It may not be the show I planned. I might have 22 cases that I'm checking, but something will come out the other end with what I have in there. And I usually have some version of a 1510. I use a Pelican Air for that 1510. It has to fit within that 22 by 14 by 9 box. And so that's something that I'm going to take with me with a backpack. And then everything has to kind of fit into those things. My little mobile rig that I join office hours from has to fit into that 1510. So everything, and everything I think about how I do it has to fit into that box. As far as checked bags, once you get a checked bags, we use when Pixelcore was doing this every day, we used a Rubbermaid digital utility scale. It goes up to about 150 pounds. You can pick the things up, but it's easier just to set them down on top of the scale. So you can tear that scale. Tearing is resetting it, but you can tear the scale and then set it down. And we would just try to have everything sitting. The reason we put it under 70 pounds if we were doing it was mostly because if you have status, remember that when you're getting stuff, if you have status, let's say 1K status, you get 3 bags for free under 70 pounds. So we get up to 69 pounds and keep them all in there. Everyone on your same ticket gets 2. So if you put 5 people on that ticket, you get your 3 plus another 10 bags. And so you end up with 13 bags under 70 pounds that can all go with you on the way out, or at least this is the way it used to work. So you could take 20 bags and you could move 2 tons or about a ton and a half or a ton or a ton or half, almost a ton of gear to Japan for about $500. It's overnight. So anyway, it's pretty useful. Next question.
Next question comes from John Fisher in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Would heat be a concern if you enclose an OBSBOT Tiny 2 entirely inside a teleprompter hood?
It is a consideration. I just got that camera. I'm just looking where I put that camera. We were talking about it the other day, and I bought one, and now, of course, I've set it down, and I can't figure out where I set it. Anyway, we bought the OBSBOT, and I'm comparing it right now with the, and I'm a little mystified about where it went. We're comparing it with the Insta360 Link. It's a little bit bigger. It's a lot hotter than the Insta360 Link. So it definitely. Oh, here it is. I put it back in the case. That's why I couldn't see it. So this is the OBSBOT here. So we're just starting to test it, and slightly larger than the Insta360. It has a magnetic bottom, which is really kind of cool because it'll just snap onto things, but it also snap onto its little holder. But it also has a quarter 20 right in the bottom of the base unit. I do think heat could become an issue. So if I did this, I'd probably have some ventilation or even fins that we pushed up against it. So what I'm thinking about, because I am thinking about putting this into basically my plan right now with one of these as we start to do it is, if you think about a monitor down here, having a piece of glass. So this is your teleprompter glass, and I'm planning to take one of these cameras and just put it right here behind the glass and then vacuum form this glass. We've done this in the past, so it's not the first time I've done vacuum forming to a webcam. And so, but the advantage here is if we build a little opening, this can all be kind of felted in, and if I make this big enough, it can be a PTZ that's moving around, but it doesn't have any. It's just you just open it up and it'll work. And then the idea is that this box will be here, probably put a Mac Mini in it. We'll have a monitor here, probably put some audio, and then have service ports on the side. That's kind of what we're fiddling with at the moment. So trying to figure out which one of these would work to do that. But you just build the cavity for it. Because this one's getting so hot, I am thinking that what I'd probably end up doing is putting a conductive, not gel, but a sticker that you see oftentimes on NVMe storage. Put that sticker on it and then give it basically some metal fins to basically offshoot some of that heat. I think is something that I'm starting to think about pretty hard. Go ahead, Brett.
Real quick, if you do also have the HDMI adapter that OBSBot sells, that thing can really cook if it's plugged in for a while.
Well, and but the HDMI adapter doesn't pass control, does it? I haven't.
No.
Yeah, that's the problem with it. Is that once you plug it in that way, you can't get control of the camera.
You can if you still use the separate remote control. But
sure,
yeah.
Sorry,
it's early days.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big problem we have is we can't. I mean, I think that these can't either OBSBot or Link or Insta360 needs to build one with. I mean, I would pay more if they made the chip a little bit bigger. So they just go to a 1-inch chip. Or even better yet, an APS size chip, but let's just say a 1-inch chip along with a HDMI output at $500, they'd sell as many as they could make. Like that would really solve a lot of problems for a lot of people. Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Galestoyo, New Mexico says, looking to replace my dad's very old iMac with a Mac Mini. Am I correct in assuming that he won't need much extra RAM? He uses it for Zoom, word processing, and not much more. For him, what seems best is lots of storage. Other features at the base stats.
I'll go with Jason.
Yeah, based on what I know about your use case, I think you would be exactly right. The only push that I would think of would be if he ends up needing more I/O to get all 4 Thunderbolt ports instead of Thunderbolt and USB-C. That aside, your RAM will be just fine for at least 5 years.
Yeah, I think for what we use, I mean, a lot of the stuff we use just for Zoom has all been 8 gig. So that totally makes sense. You might want to think about an external drive. Now, you can get some of them. Saatchi makes one that I've been having mixed results with, but I think OWC also makes one that you can basically set underneath the Mac Mini, and then that becomes the drive. And so then it's just the same form factor. It kind of feels like it's the same computer. The reason that you want to try to, if your dad's willing to, try to have him use an external drive is that if you have all your stuff on an external drive and something goes wrong with the computer, you need to replace it. If all of your stuff, your iPhoto or photos and everything else is on that external drive, you just simply unplug it, take it to be worked on, and you don't have a lot of data in the computer itself. So that oftentimes is a little bit safer there. But otherwise, I think your 8 gigs is going to be totally sufficient for what you're doing. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I concur the 8 gig. And I recently bought one of these. I was worried that it was one of the Samsung, but it's a Lexar 1 terabyte. It's portable USB-C, and it's very high speed communications over USB-C, 2200, something like that, megabytes per second. So something that's like this, it's portable, and it can give you an extra terabyte that's you can move off and archive if you need to.
Next question.
Alexander Knight in Vancouver, BC here on the panel says, any first-hand experience with the quality of USA-made Gaffer Power brand gaffers tape? I have been ordering Dabco, but they've been on back order.
You go, Bill.
We could and have talked for entire days about gaffer's tape. It's one of those subjects that is constantly interesting to me because there's so many aspects to it. I have bought 2 different orders of the same brand of gaffer's tape, and their sticky quality has been substantially different. That always bothers me. So eventually I think I end up with like Sherco or something like that, or Technic, because there was some consistency with that. Also, the age of the roll can make a big difference in how, if it's really old, it gets really weird in terms of its stiction.
Yeah, and I use ProGraph almost exclusively for what I do. Next question.
Nick Hertz in Hartford, Connecticut. You mentioned using AWS Elemental Link to send a program to remote servers. Do you ever have a use case to send a program as SRT to a remote location? If so, what do you use to send the SRT?
SRT isn't really in my core, our process. We still use the Elemental Cloud. So usually we find a way to get it to the Elemental Cloud inside of AWS. And then that can be RTMP, SRT, a variety of other things. And from there, we can use between Media Connect and Media Live, send it to as SRT to some other place. That is generally how we pass SRT around. There are more direct ways to do it. Again, you can use OBS, you can use Epiphan. As far as hardware goes, it'll do SRT contribution. You can do, there's a lot of different ways to do it. That's how I do it, or how we do it. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania says Adobe Mogart, M-O-G-R-T files allow graphics such as lower third titles to be time stretched on a timeline to increase or decrease proportional elements. I wish to recreate these graphics in Fusion. How do I enable proportional settings versus fixed animations?
I do not know how to do that. I know how to do that in Motion. So Motion will do that. In Fusion, I don't know how to build. I don't know if that does that. That's a really good one. We are going to bring someone on from Fusion. We had a great conversation at SIGGRAPH, and we're going to bring someone on to talk about Fusion. So save that question, and we'll see if we can't find out if they know that within the next couple of weeks. Next question.
David Brady, New York City. Has anyone figured out OBSBot Tiny 4K OSC implementation? I cannot figure out how to send commands to the camera vis-a-vis a companion using generic OSC.
Just got it. And remember, it's Tiny 2. So I think the Tiny 2 is the one that's OSC compatible, not the original Tiny. And since we just got it, I haven't figured it out yet, but we are going to be, that's the main reason I'm testing this camera is OSC control. So we'll come back to us a little bit later and we'll see if we can't figure it out. You'll probably see us in after hours trying to doodle with it. Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman, Galisteo, New Mexico, and I pronounced that wrong again, I'm sure. Is there any good market for used Sony cameras, or do people not really get rid of them?
Oh, there's a big market. I mean, you can definitely find lots of used Sony cameras on eBay. So there should be reasonably good, everything from the 5100s all the way up to the A7s. There's plenty of them on eBay on almost a regular basis. I don't really buy used cameras because usually I'm afraid that there's going to be dust or scratches on the sensor. So that's why I tend to avoid it. But that's overall, that is the thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill, you're laughing about something.
No. It's a comment made off camera. Sorry.
Oh, got it. Okay.
My apologies.
Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. Gizmodo mentioned that Threads have lost nearly 80% of its daily active users. Do you think that's just a temporary slump, or do you think Threads will grow? And there's a link there.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, it's an interesting question. I think we're in the trough of disillusionment right now, to use a metaphor. And I think one of the benefits of Threads was you got to reset your social graph from Instagram. And I think that's why you saw that initial surge. The latest data shows the trend will decay for a bit, but then will balance and then increase probably about 10 or 15%. So I think once people get realigned between X, Threads, Mastodon, and the others, I think we'll see Threads be successful over time.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how they do there. I think that a lot of us just went up to make sure that we kept our name, and then we left, and then it wasn't that much better than anything else. And I feel like jumping from X to Threads is like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. So I'm not sure a lot of us really are that excited about it. Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Galisteo, New Mexico, USA. Has anyone used Zoom Phone for their business? Is it worth it for small business? I'm so sick and tired of POTS, plain old television service issues, especially with CenturyLink.
Go ahead, John.
I don't have direct experience with Zoom. We recently went to RFP for our phone system, and Zoom just didn't have quite all the functions we needed as a full contact center. But it was pretty impressive what they have for a first attempt, so it definitely would be worth looking into. Another option you might consider is Amazon Connect because it's totally usage-based, so it would be probably a lower cost overall.
Go ahead, Jason.
If you've got the bandwidth, I think it's phenomenal. And yes, I've dealt way too many times with CenturyLink. It is not a pleasant experience. Guy loved Zoom Phone, and I think that's all you need to know about it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think that Zoom is doing a pretty good job there. I mean, I think I don't understand even how RingCentral is going to survive that process. So that things have gone actually fairly well for Zoom as far as the telephone. I thought it was kind of an ancillary business for them, but it's worked out fairly effectively, and so I would definitely take a look at it. It seems to be successful in that realm. And now we're going to jump into our second hour, and I'm going to hand it off to Ryan Rademan, we have an incredible group of people who have come together to talk about project management and project management tools, and Ryan's going to help us kind of kick it off and manage the beginning of this conversation. Take it away, Ryan.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those of you not here in the same time zone. So we're excited to go deeper as a part of kind of the Monday business theme for office hours into a bit of a series on project management. So for today, for the first in that theme, we've assembled a group of specialists on project management. We'll take a moment to introduce the four of us that have kind of organized. So my name's Ryan Rademan. I sit in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm focused day-to-day on construction tech. So as you can imagine, construction companies are very focused on project management and project management tools. So I manage implementations of those tool sets. And so a big part of my professional life revolves around project management. And I am joined next by Peter Buck, who will introduce himself.
Hi, Peter Buck, San Francisco-based technologist, focused really on the professional services space. Worked at PwC, Duff, HBR, and most recently at NetDocuments running product strategy. So I'm about products and technology and helping businesses grow.
Next, we'll have Craig.
Sure. Hi, folks. Craig McFarland. I'm CTO, co-founder of a software and services company. We basically help large enterprises, large organizations migrate data centers, migrate to the cloud, all those sort of things, large IT, large projects. And so happy to be here.
Awesome. Finally, Mark.
And my name is Mark Giuliani from Giuliani Associates Architects. We're a small A&E firm that does work projects that range in size from 200 square foot coffee kiosk at airports and travel plazas all the way up to hundreds of thousands of square feet of vehicle maintenance, whether it's an aircraft, a train, or fleets of trucks. I also run a small marketing company, Data Tech Digital, that owns 2 radio stations in Delaware, and we help small businesses brand each other. So now that we've introduced ourselves, we'll get into the topic of project management. And today we're going to start with tools. But we know tools, well, we chose tools because we know the audience here likes tools. But we also know that project management is about more than tools. So it's about initiating, planning, executing, and it's really about having a program. And programs have goals and budgets and schedules and deliverables. And they include teams, whether the team members are owners or clients, which provide approval, or users that may be helping to define a program. There's also, in my industry of architecture and engineering, there's teams that are made up of architects, many engineers, many types of engineers, contractors, again, the owners and the user groups, and sometimes authorities having jurisdiction. They have to make sure the project's complying with codes. But we'd really like to hear from you. We're going to talk about tools today, but we'd like to hear from you in the chat about what you'd like to hear about in the future. And we've come up with some ideas that you can see on the slide in front of you, if we could put that up, that has, it starts, we've basically created it as a top half and top of fold, if you will, with item 1, 2, 5, and 6 being project topics that we thought we could talk about that are general in nature and probably only need to be covered once for each industry. And the bottom half, 3, 4, 7, and 8, talk about project management in different areas of focus. So for agency work, which we hope to be having a presentation on later this year, or different industries like architecture, engineering, construction, and other professional services. We also want to review different types of tools, and these we can go over on a more frequent basis because there are so many tools. And then finally, talk about the good, bad, and ugly of projects. So please put in the chat what interests you, and even if you want to have a basic project management 101 on the essential elements of project management. Now I'm going to turn it over to Peter, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about project management.
Thanks, Mark. Should be a fun session today. Keep those questions coming in the chat. Ultimately, we are all project managers. From the to-do list we keep to the large, well-funded projects that we deliver on time and over budget. I'm joking on that topic. But the point is that there's a lot of complexity in this space, and there's also a lot of interesting opportunities. But as many say, project management is like waste management. You don't want more of it. And so I think of project management really as a movie. You need a villain, a hero, and a result. And so this brings me to two reasons that project management exists. The first is to solve the silver burrito problem. Maybe we can show the burrito. You see this on somebody's desk, and everybody knows exactly what it is, what to expect. But projects are like the silver burrito. There are probably 10 standard deviations of what expectations are in that burrito. Cheese, rice, pico de gallo, you go on and on and on. So everybody needs to get on the same page and understand the same problem. And so everybody typically has been burned by the promise that something would be quick, but you end up working late nights. So two ideas. One, instead of suggesting something would be quick, ask somebody, what would you need for this project to be doable in the next 20 days? This provides agency. So again, a couple examples might be, instead of saying we've got a decay in the number of users signing up on our site, you can turn that into a much more positive hypothetical. Those hypotheticals we can cover throughout this session, but you can define it as a problem statement. What are we trying to solve? What are the benefits of the business? But do that in a really simple form and do it in a narrative before you start working with tools. So for example, instead of saying clients always abandon our website, you could say clients abandon at too high of rate and they fail to sign up at the last step. Now you have something you can solve. The second thing I want to cover around project management is ultimately what is broadly called the herding cats problem. We've all been there before. We all have a series of team members that we want to participate in a project, but they have different objectives, different challenges. And so the idea is, how do you bring those teams together in a way that makes sense? And so my proposition is that it might not be the kittens, it might be your project and how you frame that. Are you clear on the outcome as a project manager? Sure, it's easy to be pulled off course as team members and work on different projects. They might be polite when they're sitting in a project meeting and then undermine the team later. So there's a number of dimensions. 4 come to mind. Personalities. Each cat has a different background, intentions, introvert, extrovert. Distractions. They get back to their desk and now suddenly their phone calls. Time. Time is both a headwind and a tailwind. You got to make sure that you position it correctly with your stakeholders. The collective energy of the team and adaptability. So the point about herding cats and silver burritos are 4. You got to have clear objectives. Be careful about shifting requirements. Don't be reactive. And ultimately a misaligned or understood team. So unwrapping the silver burrito, you can create a clear vision of what the project is and a shared problem statement. Those are 2 items for success for project management. So I'll turn it back to the panel to talk a little bit about tools. That's one of our topics today. Craig's going to join me. But before I do, I want to show this screen, which is what's called a market map. Those familiar with it, this is an array of product categories in the product management or project management space. For those interested in this space, this market is a $2.5 billion market in 2020. It's going to grow to a $6.5 billion market. So it's a big segment. Compare that to the AV industry at $3.2 billion a year ago. It's going to grow to $8 billion. So you can see it's a substantial market. So there's tons of tools. The goal today is to give you a taste of what some of those tools can do and help you navigate them. I think there are some questions in the chat about how we do simple project management. I'm going to show you some of those today. So Craig, I think you have some interesting ideas for us.
Yeah, I think there's probably only one category that's larger than project management as a big tent of tools. And I think part of that is maybe text editors or whatnot. There's probably more of them. But when you think of all the various categories, and you've had some of them up there on the slide, these are just two aspects of complexity. And I'm sorry for the background. I've got construction going on right in the background here. So complexity versus how formal it is. So if you're running a really large, if you're building a satellite that's going to take 5 years, that's one end. Or if you're just working with a buddy trying to build something and you need to organize your thoughts, that's on the lower left end. So looking at the various aspects, this is just a sample grid of those two aspects. Actually, if you can go to the next slide. There you go. So one of my big points, so as a CTO, I look at a lot of tools and I do a lot of tool selection. Picking, it doesn't have to be perfect, but going through and identifying what do we really need. A lot of times people jump into a tool because they used it on a previous project or their buddy recommended it or whatnot. It might be a great tool, but it really helps just to take a few minutes, and here's a few things I usually look at as far as picking the right tool. Just write down and then share with the other principal people that you're in the project with various aspects of what do you need? What's the situation we're trying to resolve? How big is the scope of the project? How complicated is it? Is it going to have 50 tasks or is it going to have 5,000? How long is it? And going through all of these will let you get a better picture, and you can share the shopping around comparing. If you'd all just keep it in your head, it gets a little fuzzy, and then evaluating one versus another is really difficult, and everybody then switches to what's their favorite tool that they've used before. And so you can see here, we took that original 3x3 and filled it in with some things. So you can see on the bottom left, things, I'm not sure the logos, but on the bottom left would be personal to-do lists and things, and going through Airtable all the way up to ServiceNow, Microsoft Project, and Asana, and Atlassian has a lot of large enterprise tooling. And it really just depends on the situation that you're working with. So I'd recommend go through that list of those 7 or 8 different aspects, share it with the team, and then go shopping around. And actually, it really makes the selection a lot easier because things will get dropped out.
Craig, one thing we're going to talk about today too, pertinent to that slide, is that some of these tools are suited and tailored for a particular industry. So we talked about construction as an example, where you've got industry-specific tools designed for managing a construction project. But among these that we're looking at on kind of this 2x2 grid, I would say the biggest thing I'd point out is that some of these are very oriented around the software development lifecycle, and some of these are much more general, where they could manage a project across any domain. And then the other thing is, there's a question that we'll be addressing later on agile project management. So some of these tool sets are very oriented around the agile methodology, whereas others are a little bit more organized around a traditional waterfall methodology when we're talking about kind of the two ends of the spectrum related to software development and the software project management realm.
Can you define this too for our listeners?
Define what, Alex?
Agile versus waterfall?
Agile versus waterfall.
Sure, yeah. And please, the rest of the group chime in here. But if you go back to like the 80s when software development became something that was, really happening at a large scale and across the world, the waterfall methodology was pervasive. And there was basically kind of 4 steps to it. You've kind of got this design stage, a build stage, a validate and deploy stage. And the point with waterfall is that when it came to requirements gathering, you needed to be very diligent in talking to all of the different stakeholders and ensuring that all of the requirements that one was going to ultimately want in the software were very well documented and very well organized before we began investing in build. Assume that back in the 80s and 90s, you were on on-premise infrastructure, so you had significant server capacity that needed to be procured. And depending on all the features that we're going to need to ultimately end up in place, depending on the number of users that were going to be hitting this system and the places from which those users would be hitting them, that would actually be, that would drive the physical infrastructure that was going to be needed to put in place, right? How many servers do we need? How big do they need to be? Where do they need to be located? Well, you fast forward to 2023, and even, I started in this industry 10 years ago. So let's just put ourselves in 2014. You've now got the cloud. So infrastructure became something that was much more elastically scalable, right? I think we all kind of know that Amazon was a pioneer in getting us server capacity that could be upgraded really quickly, even kind of on command as the user base of a particular software need grew. And so when you've got a infrastructure that can scale, you really have the opportunity to iterate in a much more tight cycle. And instead of needing to get all of your requirements nailed down well before a build takes place, you've got the opportunity to build some of the most critical baseline features and then get users into that system sooner than later to test and provide real-time feedback on what they actually need. And the benefit here is rather than us building proactively, right? If you picture, I might have a family of 6, and so I'm going to build a 6-bedroom house because it's hard to add on, right? In software, we don't have that same challenge. In software, we can build the bare minimum. And as our family, our team, our company, as our needs grow, we can iterate. Excuse me.
Yeah, Ryan, it's interesting, or Alex, to your point, it may be a picture is a good way to show waterfall versus agile. It comes back a little bit to the mythical man month that was an agile or a waterfall model, which is, adding manpower to a late project only makes it later. So if you show the screen just real quick, we'll just show you 2 visuals to identify waterfall. This is a classic waterfall, a Gantt chart, where a series of activities have to follow in order with resources planned well in advance. And if one goes late, the rest goes late. The contrast might be this, which is commonly known as a Kanban board, where Agile allows you to say anything that does not deliver value to the end user or the project is considered waste. And so it's much more easy to move things from planned to in progress. So the idea is dynamically allocating resources, time to get things done faster and ideally generate that minimum viable product earlier.
Well, and I think that before all these terms were there, I had a very specific way of building things from the time I was in my, literally early teens. And I think for me, I always look at it as a little bit of both of what is now defined as agile and waterfall, which is that I would experiment with a lot of things and just kind of move them around as people reacted to them or as I reacted to them. And then lock into, okay, now I'm going to build something complicated that has to have, or I would build something complicated. The most recent software development thing I did, we had to build an iOS app. And we had to do what would be considered waterfall to get it to where it to release it. But as soon as it was released, it really felt a lot more like agile, because we're now we're building all this stuff where we're constantly we're looking at things and responding to in a relatively real-time way. Build new builds every couple of days. As soon as as soon as it's out there. But we had to get that base, because sometimes if you have too much Agile, you end up with a chaotic code structure. And if you end up with too much waterfall, you built a city that no one wants to move into. So those are the things that, those are the two sides of that puzzle.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's interesting if you go back to Craig's and Ryan's opening remarks. I believe that there's a transition we're seeing between traditional project management into something called product management, because ultimately today things are presented digitally. Sorry, Mark, we don't always build buildings. And the idea that once you get it out there, you've got to curate it. And so the process that you did to build it might not be the process and tools you use to maintain it.
And I think the hard part for me has always been I tend to throw things away a lot. I want to throw the code away, or just throw whatever I'm developing away. So we get to a certain point, and that was useful to expose what was necessary, and then oftentimes switching to more of a waterfall to build out what we've now seen is necessary. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
Well,
yeah, so Ryan, maybe we'll come back. Oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to say, I think, would it be fair to say that the traditional waterfall method is when at the beginning of a project, you know what the goals are for the outcomes, and Agile, you don't know. You're trying to make this up as you go along and determine what's the most important factor to get resolved.
Yeah, I'd say if you know, like building a bridge, you know what it's going to be. There's requirements. It's really clear. If you're doing something new and creative, as Alex was talking about, then you don't know how it's going to weave through. And I whenever I finish a project that we did using an Agile methodology, I'll look back to our original thoughts and ideas and imagine if we had done it waterfall, all the things we would have built and then throw away because that was a bad idea, but we didn't know it at the time. So if it's purely creative, go Agile all the time.
My favorite quote when I think about this is from Armageddon, the movie, where he goes, this is what happens when you drill, and he's like, we cannot follow your little cards about what time we're supposed to be at things and everything else. It's just that I think that the power of Agile is really that the map is never the territory. And so you're hitting the ground. You need to have enough infrastructure to figure it out, but then you need to be able to respond. I think and it seems to be a little bit of a mix of both. Did you have more of a presentation to show before we jump into the questions? They're starting to stack up.
No, let's jump in there. I would just observe one of the metaphors I use quite a bit, Alex and team, is the iron triangle. You might have heard that before. The idea that you can do it fast, cheap, or well. So you have to pick two.
Yeah.
And I think Agile is fast in navigating the iron triangle. So consider that as you're scoping your projects.
Absolutely. Now let's go to the first question.
Bo Cordell is in from Charleston, South Carolina. Do you take any cues from methodologies like Agile or Scrum for project management?
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, so as we're talking about from a project management perspective, the project manager's role is pretty much the same, whether it's waterfall or Agile. It's all about organizing and making sure that everyone's clear about what's needed and whatnot. There's certain aspects of each of the methodologies, like having a backlog versus an official plan. And so there's some mechanics of it. For our own company, we do Agile. It's not pure Agile. It's a kind of a mix. And I think that's probably true for a lot of Agile places where you just mix and match how much planning you need to do, how much of a backlog, and how you adhere to having a daily Scrum, talking about.
And do you want to define Scrum? Just talk about what.
Yeah, so Scrum actually comes from rugby, where everybody gets together in an Agile project. Everybody gets together for 15, 20 minutes. It's usually, originally, it was when we were all in one place. Everybody's standing together, hence the term Scrum, and talking about, all right, here's my plan for the day. And it might change tomorrow, but here's what I'm planning to do. And it's a good way of just touching base, and everybody goes off and does their thing, keeps the team somewhat unified, and you're able to grab somebody that may be drifting off. So you're still working on that. Why? And so the intent is super quick, 30-second, 1 minute at most update on what you're doing.
Go ahead, Ryan.
What I would just remind everybody is that, when it comes to building buildings, you're not going to be using an agile methodology, right? So that question's really pertinent to software projects.
In some cases, I mean, I think that there's an agileness in the design. I mean, there oftentimes on larger projects, or some of the projects that I've worked on, I've seen people build pieces of it to see how that's going to work. I mean, on really large projects to see, or lots of models. So I guess the models would be kind of the agile nature of it. I just watched that video that you talked about, the line yesterday. So what you can see behind them is millions and millions and millions of dollars spent on little pieces of cardboard to figure out how to do it. So would you say that, Ryan, would you think that as an agile method before you go into a waterfall, which is that you have to start pouring concrete?
Yeah, good point, right? So, I mean, Mark can speak to the fact that there is a phase of construction called pre-construction, and there is a discipline within that called VDC. And so now that has moved to a much more digital process where, you're not just simulating, in this case, what the building will look like. I watched a documentary produced by the B1M on a tower that was just completed down the road from me here called Salesforce Tower at Wolf Point in Chicago. They didn't just simulate what the building would look like. They simulated every single step of the construction process, including some specifics around how they were going to get the crane up and how they were going to get the crane out at the end of it, because they had boxed themselves in a way where basically they had to use the river and the underground road system to get that crane out in small chunks. So planning is basically simulated in its entirety for mega projects, and then plays out in real time as close to that as possible. But there's a point where you get from conceptual design to construction design where the iteration starts to be minimized.
Go ahead, John.
The important thing on project management is getting the project done and completing it within your scope. And it really depends on what you're trying to achieve as to which approaches work best. So if I'm building a compliance training, I'm going to follow an approach much more like a waterfall approach, where I have a defined end and I just want to outline the steps to get there. I also lead a team that does a lot of process improvement and efficiencies projects. And that's really an agile approach, because done never happens, and we're constantly creating new tasks for our backlog. A backlog is just a list of tasks, essentially, that the team chooses what to work on over a given period of time, called a sprint. And so we use the agile methodology for that team because our work's never complete. We're always trying to improve just a little bit.
And if you look at, like, for instance, how we cover these conferences, what you're looking at is a giant, in my opinion, a giant agile method, which is that we have a sprint, which is the conference itself, and then we take a break, but we're trying to redefine something completely. So it's an experiment. Every single one of these is slightly different than the ones in the past, and we're trying to find we don't have a solution. We have a goal. A goal is to include people from all over the world into the experience of that conference. But how we do that is almost completely undefined, and we're constantly like, what if we do a bunch of videos? What if we do a bunch of this? What if we do a bunch of that? 2 or 3 years from now, we will have a way that we just do this. Like, this is the way we, but we didn't look at the past as much as we look at just the goal, and staying focused on that goal, and then constantly experimenting with what that looks like. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I think it comes back a little bit to the silver burrito problem, that you have to define, regardless of the methodology, what problem are you solving, but do it in simple business terms. And why is it worth solving? That's you can spend a day or less on that, and you get everybody aligned, and you're off to the races, regardless of the methodology.
Go ahead, Mark.
So just take a step back for a few minutes about the construction. I know that when I started in architecture, there were clearly defined lines between the design of a project, where you started with a program, and then you went to schematic design, then on to design development, and then prepared the contract documents or the construction documents. Then it went into construction. Today, with all the technology of both project management and also building information modeling, that is blurring together and happening at a much faster pace, because the technology is there to enable it to happen at a faster pace.
Next question.
Next one comes from Dave Troutman at Edmonton, Canada. Are most management software tools extremely complicated? Are there any lightweight tools for the rest of us?
Go ahead, Ryan.
So Monday.com is probably an example of one that is particularly lightweight. And then remember, too, there's a lot of to-do list tools. So on some of the market maps that you've seen here, you've seen things like Microsoft To Do. And, that and Planner from Microsoft work together. And that one of those is just basically, hey, here are the things that I need to do. Planner introduces a couple more complexities where, hey, now I can at least put those across swim lanes into a to do, doing, and done column. From there you scale up to, can I assign these to other people instead of just being assigned to me? So certainly there are tools that we've mentioned here today that require a lot of infrastructure and upkeep that are, not defined as lightweight. A lot of these are defined as lightweight. And we haven't yet mentioned probably the most famous and utilized project management tool, even in 2023, which is Microsoft Excel, right?
Or Google Sheets.
Or Google Sheets, exactly right. You don't need a sophisticated tool set to be an effective project manager.
Go ahead, Peter.
Maybe we revert back to the 3x3 grid just to throw that up on the screen. I think this is really instructive, Ryan, your points around simple tools. If you look in that far left quadrant, the very lower left is Planner from Microsoft, To-Do List from Microsoft. Above that is what Ryan was just mentioning and Alex around spreadsheets, Google Sheet, Excel. And then on the top left is tools that are gaining in popularity. One of my favorite personally is Smart Suite. It was spent 2.5 years in development and recently emerged as an interesting contributor. The other is Notion. But there's this theme of what's called the Work OS. And I think this goes to the listener's question about simple tools. There are 4 products in the Work OS category: Airtable, Monday.com, ClickUp, and finally Smart Suite. And these are designed really for the modern web era, and they're more visual, easier to use, and they're inexpensive. They're less than $7 per user per month. So that's a place to start. And then if you really want to go big, you can go back to the Microsoft Project Online or ServiceNow Smart Sheet versus Smart Suite to get into the traditional Gantt. And those will start to be in the $20 to $50 per user per month. So money talks in this game.
Go ahead, Craig.
Mute. Yeah, and I'd say there's much like when I talked about the requirements or needs. What's your situation? How many people? But look at the peripheral other things, like do you need to share documents a lot? That's not pure project management, but it is more just the Work OS kind of thing. And so what other things are you using? Is there something from the same vendor that you're already, the team's already working with? So if you're using Google Docs, maybe Google Sheets, okay. But it's really looking at all of those needs, as I mentioned.
Good, Mark.
So just going back to the spreadsheets and the worksheets, I've seen some very sophisticated but easy to use programs where people have just put together documents that are tied to each other. I think the one thing that's coming out with all these specific programs is that they tie more of the project together. So they tie it together with team, so you know who's on the team, what the role is, how to get in touch with them. Then you have the ability to file share, which you don't really have with a worksheet.
Next question.
Next one comes from Chris Sabato in Albany, Oregon. How do you get a team on board with using a project management tool with a team that's not coming from an edict from higher ups?
Good, Mark.
So this is very interesting. It's hard to do when there is no edict from higher up. Most of the projects that we work on over a certain dollar value have in the contract language what programs will be used, whether it's the type of building information modeling or project management software, so that the whole team knows ahead of time before they sign the contract, what do they have to be part of in order to make the project run smoothly. If you don't have that, it's difficult to get all these different teams that are used to these different programs to tie together on one.
I think Slack did it pretty well. I know that when my producer started adding Slack to the system, I was like, why are we adding another layer of something or whatever? And before I knew it, within 6 months, I was like, why are you emailing me this? You just put it in Slack. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I think on the Slack, Microsoft Teams point, if you look at the market maps, we can share these in a separate future session. The ecosystem there is massive. And that's why, because it's easy. It's simple. The second point I'd make about how to get this done right is to get buy-in. Take sort of the Japanese executive style and make sure that all the constituencies know what's trying to be achieved before you launch a tool. A tool without a purpose is a fool's errand. So be sensitive to that.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You need to make sure that the tool is something that's useful and is making your team better. You can include your team in the selection process for the tool. I know for my team that does the Agile approach, we use just an Excel spreadsheet, and I designed it the way I thought that we needed to do it as a team, but I let them take it on from there, and I delegated that to them. It looks nothing like I originally had, but it works for them, and they're getting the work done. And so in this case, I'm just closing my mouth and letting them work.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, speaking as both as a worker and a higher up, I prefer not to have something dictated from higher up that may not know all the details of how the team needs to work. So going through the requirements as a team without mandates is actually a really good thing.
I found as oftentimes the higher up is I would just be like, well, here, this is where I'm going to be. So you guys can figure out what you want to do. It wasn't really an edict, but more of a carrot. Like if you want to actually ask a question. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. For solo developers or small teams under 10 persons, what project management tools do you find most useful?
It sounds to me like, to me like this question is, organized around the software scenario. And so GitHub is what I would recommend. GitHub has the ability to build out a backlog and assign backlog items to people and lay those out by milestone, by assignee, by stage or status. So that's probably a good place to start for software.
Good, Peter.
Yeah, for source code management, perfect. GitHub is brilliant. If you're doing product management, a couple products that are nice. One is called AHA, A-H-A, exclamation point. It's cheap, and it does a great job of generating roadmaps and getting teams to do burn downs. The second is RoadMonk, R-O-A-D, Monk. I think separately, first time at the end, there's a series of product catalogs we built for this audience to help, and those are on that catalog.
Go ahead, Brett.
The other thing, when you're on a small team, in order to integrate different tools, Zapier really shines to be able to keep costs down and to have things talk to Google Sheets or to Trello or, send notifications to Slack to keep communications up on a shoestring budget.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What project management tools have the best reporting and interoperability features?
Go, Peter.
This is an interesting category because I use Excel or Sheets tons for reporting. There's a series of other products, Power BI, if you need to do visualization and dashboard, or Tableau, are just absolutely great. Maybe in a second, I'll bring up a series of other products, but Power BI is my favorite.
Next question.
CJ Koval in Downington, Pennsylvania says, I am a material, he's a material manufacturer for metal cladding. Do you have any experience getting construction projects from a source like Construct Connect into a sales project flow using Salesforce? Looking for real-time changes to get pushed to our team.
Good, Mark.
So I haven't seen this from Construct Connect, but we're not contractors, we're architects. Where we see it more is from Deltek has a series of products for anybody that has done government contracts knows about Deltek, but they have a series of products that will go out and find where the projects are, and then you can tie it into your marketing.
Go, Ryan.
I built exactly this flow on a couple of occasions. So similar to Construct Connect, you've got Building Connected and you've got Dodge Data. And these are some, in those cases are basically publicly available feeds of projects that are coming down the pipeline, right? Dodge Data is very tuned into the permitting process in a city, right? So it knows bids that are coming down the pipe. Now, Salesforce, if you're a materials manufacturer, is the place where you want to put in new leads or opportunities that you might have to sell all of the metal cladding for one of these buildings that's going up, right? So certainly Salesforce has an open set of APIs, and with a tool like Zapier or a more robust tool like a MuleSoft, which is an integration platform that Salesforce owns, you absolutely can hook into these publicly available data feeds or private data feeds like Construct Connect and set it up so that when something hits your criteria or when you manually trigger it, it will pull those in and put them into a leader and opportunity object in Salesforce.
Next question.
Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. What should you look for in a project management tool for non-technical teams? For example, sales, content creation, and so forth.
Go, John.
Yeah, you want your tool to be as complex as needed and no more complicated than that. So I'd really look for a tool that has all the features you need and is really easy for your users to get in and get out and document their work. Because when someone doesn't see the value of adding a ton of information to a field about budget or something like that, you want to make it easy for them to do what you want them to do. And so the simpler, the better, in my opinion.
Go, Peter.
I agree. And I think if you show the screen real quick, there's a visual, how it looks to the user community is also very important. Here's an example of Smart Suite. They're similar from Monday.com. Now, anybody can understand this page and they would more likely engage in that experience. So I think that's super important. The second is make it available where they live. If you're a Slack business, you can then have it in Slack. If you're a Teams business, make it available in Teams. All these products integrate there. So take the extra time with your technical teams to make that happen, to smooth the way.
And oftentimes in the projects that I've worked on, both for other companies as well as my own, we shield a lot of the creatives and a lot of folks from that with coordinators. So we have coordinators and assistant coordinators, and their job is to tie into those tools, and they simply have small calls with the creatives. Where are you? They have a checklist of how are you doing here? How are you doing here? How are you doing here? And we make no attempt to have the creatives actually interact with the tools at all. So we have coordinators that follow up with them, and they have their list that they work through. And we found that to be, we got better data by having someone personally go, and their whole job. When I was at ILM, our coordinator would talk to us every single day. And that's her whole job. Her whole job was just to go from person to person and see where they're at, see if there's anything that's stalling them, so on and so forth. And that's all she did every day, was just making sure that we're all meeting our deadlines. She knew where we are in the deadlines, and she was passing everything into the data of where the project was. And we were just simply meeting with her for 15 or 20 minutes. If you had let us do it, we would have never filled anything out. Like we were just like, and so we found it I think a lot of firms find it easier to leave the creatives with you just budget for a coordinator that's going to, extract that information in a relatively seamless way. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Clark in Tempe, Arizona. Please discuss managing a healthy balance between teams spending time inside a software management environment versus holding face-to-face meetings of the principals.
I think I just kind of touched on, but anyway, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, exactly, Alex. Project management, don't forget, is a team sport. You have to engage. You have to be somewhat introverted or extroverted, whatever your style is. But the point is, it's all about communication. I think that's why the Agile model is so successful. Daily stand-ups are super meaningful. I've had projects where even we deploy a small iOS shortcut where all we do is publish, what'd you do today? Are there any blockers? And that gets sent to the project manager. Little things like that make life easy for a team player.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, so part of it is, what do we need to do the project itself? Then there's the social aspect of having a team that works well together, having some amount of face time or voice time makes a difference when you need to ask someone for, hey, can you show me how to do this thing? If you have that social bond, that connection, they're more likely to help each other.
Next question.
Jason Bache in Albuquerque, New Mexico here on the panel. When I attended business school, Six Sigma was intensely fashionable, and in my humble opinion, overused. Where do you think the Six Sigma process doesn't belong?
Go, John. And define Six Sigma. Yeah,
is a quality management tool or approach, which is the idea if you want your quality to be within 6 standard deviations of perfect. Probably didn't say that exactly right, but the idea is 1 in a million things that you send out has a flaw in it. It's really helpful in physically manufacturing goods and services, which is what most business schools are still built on. It's less helpful when you're talking about software.
Good, Peter.
I think also the discipline of Six Sigma, one of the tools is workflowing, and it ties nicely back to Agile, which is reduced waste in the final product. And so with all these methodologies, you have to sort of pick and choose. And I love Six Sigma for the point of the discipline of decomposing a process or a problem into its essential elements. From there, I agree, Jason, with you that it becomes very constraining. And John's point about just get a tool that gets this project done, but leaves behind artifacts so you can learn from.
Next question.
Plus, it has ninjas. Brian Schwartz, Baltimore, Maryland. What does the panel think of the IBM Rational product line?
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I think the challenge is that IBM and their tooling has been eclipsed by many products. Just look at what's happened in the AI space. GitHub owns this space, period, full stop. Unless you have very specific, you're working in languages, COBOL comes to mind, then this stack might be relevant. But I would definitely go for more open source, more modern tooling, personally.
Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. Compare Trello, Asana, Basecamp, Jira, and Microsoft Project. Which are on the rise and which are declining or stagnating?
Go ahead, Ryan.
So Microsoft Project used to be desktop software and, kind of a client server approach, but they have released a Microsoft Project online tool set. So, among the mix that we've got here, it's probably the most stagnant tool. Trello is something that's interesting. It was acquired by Atlassian. And so when you look at Trello and Jira, there's a relationship between, the publisher of those two projects. Jira is much more software focused. Trello is much more broad scenario focused. Asana and Trello, and frankly, even Asana and Jira are pretty similar. Asana is probably a little bit less software oriented. And I personally would state that kind of Basecamp is the least popular among those that you've mentioned here, but I don't have a lot of experience with it.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I think Basecamp is more of a small team for various projects, not really software oriented. I haven't seen it in use recently. It was big 4 or 5 years ago. And I'd say that out of all of these, Microsoft Project 10 years ago used to be the king of everything. And it's sort of the go-to for a lot of folks that use Office 365 for things. But I'd say that it's been more fragmented. There's more options now. So software development, a lot is going into Jira right now.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When two teams need to merge but are already invested in different project management tools and processes, what are good principles in the strategy of how to unify teams with technical baggage and entrenched practices?
This is a pretty tough question. You usually has to be reduced down to rock, paper, scissors. But, who's go ahead, Peter.
Dueling?
Yeah, form two teams. Whatever your favorite sport is, go out and play that sport. The team that wins, their tools win. No, I say that in jest because this is an intractable problem, and you have to come back to what is the problem you're solving, and then stack the tools objectively up against that problem and your skill set. The biggest challenge is, again, not the tools, it's the capability of your teams inside that match to what the solution you're building becomes. So get a team together, make it small, but also make it creative in a team building style approach.
And I have to admit, a lot of times when I'm in this situation, we end up kind of conforming to pushing our data, depends on how complex the project is, pushing our data to a client, and the client has whatever they want to use, whether it's Smartsheets or Google Docs or Monday or whatever they have working. But a lot of times internally, we're still using our own software. We're using our own project management, and we're just simply reporting back to theirs because it'd be too hard for us when we have multi-tenancy, lots of different clients. We want to give it to them in the format that they want. The big thing that we do is if there's any uncertainty on their side about what project tools they want to use, we throw ours in immediately. Like, how about we use this? And we'll invest oftentimes in adding more seats so that they can be part of it, so that we're not, if they don't know, we take over quickly and not ask them. But if they do know, then we usually try to report into their system. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Galisteo, New Mexico. Gut reaction. Is good project management trainable, or are there certain folks that it comes to naturally more than others?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, one of the great things about project management, whatever approach you use, is it's just a series of practices and behaviors to achieve a goal on time, in scope, and under budget. And anyone can learn those practices. A more analytical person or linear thinking person might have an easier time of learning them, but anyone can figure it out.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. Which of these databases is the easiest to use and most versatile? He notes Airtable.com, Asana.com, Confluence, Google Sheets, Notion.so, and what else is there?
Go, Ryan.
So I'll start by comparing Notion and Confluence because those tools are pretty similar and they aren't really databases. They're more wikis, right? Notion has certainly implemented project management tool sets within it, but at its base, it's kind of a more of a wiki structure. And I would say from a best of breed perspective, it is better than Confluence. The only reason you might want to use Confluence is because you're using Jira and you like the tightness of the integration there. Google Sheets isn't really a database, but we all know that spreadsheets can, serve the same purpose that a database can. So I'll kind of set that one off to the side. And Asana to me is much more of a project management tool set. So that kind of leaves, Airtable as the one that, pertinent to your question here, Paul. If you're looking for something that's kind of a database that's got workflow, my opinion is that Airtable is the one that's kind of most suitable in your mix.
Peter.
Yeah, I think just amend one thing you said, Ryan, just about Notion. Notion is a nice database, but it has gaps, especially for project management. There's an add-in to Notion called Nora, N-O-R-A. You can find it on Product Hunt, and it does a nice job of sort of extending the core database of Notion. Again, if the question is about databases, Airtable, as Ryan mentioned, is the top, if you come back to the WorkOS 4 I mentioned, Airtable, ClickUp, Monday, and Smart Suite all are database based and do a nice job. I tend to use Asana for tasks and deliverables more than I use anything else.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, and I'd agree with all the other folks. I think the one thing I'd be really careful about is when you have something that's super flexible and versatile, people that work within it may develop something that is really hard to use. And so having a little bit more structure to it is sometimes a really helpful thing.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. MPC, Major VFX Studio, introduced a red, amber, green system where staffers on troubled projects must spend 3 to 5 days in studio to help bring a project back on track. Do you think RTO is the magic cure for increasing team cohesion?
Go, John.
No, it's not a magic cure. And I would also say it'd be really risky to disincentivize people from being honest in a project like that. Because if you're afraid of having to come back into work, you're more inclined to lie about your status, which puts the whole project at risk.
Good, Ryan.
I will do nothing but second John's second point there. Want to incentivize, having people share that the project status is yellow or red is something you want more of, not less of.
Yeah, and the big thing is that I don't think that bringing in people into the studio, what we have had when we're really in an intense project is we open up. In the past it was Google Hangouts, now it's Zoom, but we'll just open up a window where it's a window to everybody else that you can sit there and open talk like we use After Hours for. And I don't see any better speed of us being in the same room as us all having a window that we can show everybody something that's actually more efficient to me to do it that way than to have everybody start to come in. And again, especially if someone lives out of area or not very close and it's inconvenient, as if you look at MPC in London or whatever, suddenly commuting to London in London is a huge disincentive to wanting to, I get that it seems as punishment, but what you end up with is people fuming all the way in and all the way out and thinking about what other company they could work for. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Chris Clark in Tempe, Arizona. Am I correct in thinking that project management as a field originated in the U.S. military?
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I had heard it started in the automobile industry between 1900 and 1950, along with the communications industry. And then William Dennings made it probably brought it to light most with his quality circles in the rebuilding of Japan after World War II. And then later on in the 50s, you had the PERT and the CPM charts.
Peter?
You also can't leave out David Gant from 1919 or something like that started the whole process on the manufacturing side.
Freemasons. There was a time when you could not build a building, a castle, and that took logistics, and that took project management, and that took, they were the only ones for hundreds of years that could build these things because they were able to manage a very, very complex and highly scaled project to make that happen. So they're probably the innovators of that area. But you could even go back to the Egyptians. There had to have been, I don't know what it was, it's probably a bunch of little pictures that are going on there, but we have to understand that somehow people had to track how you're going to build a pyramid, and how you're going to do those things. So I think that we can talk about project management tools the way modern project management tools, I think, are exactly accurate here. But we have to remember that some version of this existed for the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Up next, if leadership is removing the fear of failure in your followers, how do good project management tools provide that leadership?
Good, Ryan.
That red, yellow, green status piece that was brought up, there was a leader at the Ford Motor Company that did a good job reminding the team that when your status of one of your items is yellow or red, the status of you as the owner of that item is not yellow or red. So I don't know that tools can necessarily do this, but one thing that I try to avoid is building dashboards that are putting a ton of heat on an individual for maybe being the person that's most willing and able to take on the most complicated elements, and something that's much more oriented around helping people swarm those items that are complicated, and helping people swarm those people that are under kind of the most weight on a particular matter.
Go ahead, Peter.
I go back to the old adage, a bad strategy is not made correct or better by harder work. And I think it does come back to the silver burrito again, just to promote my favorite food, is that this define the problem statement. A lot of times, and this sits at the feet of many project managers, they get too buried in Ryan's point around red, green, and yellow status. But what is the business outcome? Are we advancing this project towards that? And that allows you to get the executives to say, oh, there is a mismatch between my perception and the progress of the team. Again, it's teamwork.
Yeah. And mostly what I do in my outside of office hours is I'm kind of a fixer. So when I come in and I look at a process that isn't working, and then I find a way to make it work. And almost every single, and then I build logistics around that. And the thing that I usually find is that folks have gone like this. The goal's over here, and they've gone like this, and they're kind of just wandering around here trying to find that goal. And usually, I'm not trying to make this go a certain direction. I start back at the beginning. I look at the goal and draw a straight line to it, and then I figure out how to get to there. And I just generally ignore all of this. And whatever the past was, and that's really hard. And sometimes I have to allow the past to continue to do its thing while I build a more direct route to that. But a lot of times I think that you have to constantly be looking at what is the end goal and keep on resetting to it, because I think what happens is people get caught up in what are the logistics and what are the intermediate goals, as to going back to what are we trying to get to, rather than what are we dealing with here. There's a river and everyone's spending time crossing the river. I'm like, well, we might be able to do some other way to get across the river, instead of fording it there, and so, but people can get mired up in immediate logistics, and you oftentimes have to reset that. And I have to reset it constantly. Like, well, how do I reset that? Because I'll do it too. Like, I'll get lost in that, in dealing with those logistics. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. We talk about troubled projects. Have you ever had cases where you've seen a project that has no hope of getting back on track, but upper management does not recognize that?
Good, Craig.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the mute button. This happens a lot, especially in really large organizations where someone is disconnected, has a mandate, and the team just can't get it done in that time or can't do this thing. And I personally take a lot of comfort in that there is a reality, and me stressing that something has to be done in a month that is impossible to do in 2 or 3 months, there's comfort there that, hey, just can't be done. And the other aspect is transparency. And so when everybody sees what's going on, when there's full transparency up and down, whoever is holding on to a failed notion of time or budget or some other aspect, it'll be clear to everyone.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When would you recommend a team to grow to a more complex tool versus scaling back the tools to accommodate the team?
Good, Ryan.
I personally would not worry about whether you're on a tool that's too big or too small. As long as you're on a tool that you feel is reasonably modern, it's cloud-based, it seems like it's going to be around, I would stick with that tool.
Good, Peter.
Yeah, project management is like practice. And so if you start with an Excel spreadsheet and build a nice dashboard that's pleasing, you can replicate that in higher, more complex platforms and also begin integrating them with Slack or Teams. So you have to, again, design it how you want it, and then we can fit the tool. I would observe just, we did prepare an interesting set of products. And if you share the screen real quick, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but hopefully in the Discord, we'll share a dashboard there where we sort of created a series of tools and products and then have a series of ratings around what we think is the most important. So it might be a good way for you to look at those tools and filter them by different categories. So for example, here is what we talked about earlier about WorkOS. And you can see the products that we think are relevant in that space. So it's a resource for you, and maybe as a group, we can continue to contribute it as necessary.
Last question.
Last question comes from Brian Schwartz in Baltimore, Maryland. What tool would you recommend for tracking and prioritizing product defects and new feature requests?
Good, Craig.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of product management as well as, so defects are more of the trouble ticket, help desk type of thing. We use Jira a lot, and that's pretty widespread, so I would look at that.
Incredible panel. Just incredible, just amazing work. Thank you to everyone who came and joined the great presentation and just great Q&A. And I think that we really covered just an amazing amount of project management. This is the beginning, right? We're going to keep on having these conversations, which I think are really important for us to understand. And I just think this team did just an amazing job at putting these together. So thank you. I know that there was a lot of effort and planning to make this happen, and I really appreciate it. Just really, really great. How often do you guys have a plan on a cadence? Is it once a month, once a week?
We know Office Hours has a pretty detailed schedule that goes out, weeks and months. So we're kind of ready and available with more for the series as time allows within the schedule.
Yeah, it's great.
And we've set up a Discord channel so people can ask, could tell us what ideas that they want to hear about in project management. So go ahead over to Discord.
Yeah, this is like a perfect hour.
Cool.
Yeah, just to really just have a bunch of experts that set some stuff up over time, and then just really the people who actually are in this answering those questions really, really effectively. We just really appreciate the effort. Coming up this week, we've got a lot of things going on. Tuesday, we've got, of course, the show workshop. If you want to figure out what it's like to be a panelist or a reader or those sites, we basically put together a pseudo show. It's at noon Pacific Standard Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and so check that out. You'll see links in that in the email that goes out. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about SIGGRAPH, not how we did SIGGRAPH. We already talked about that. We're going to talk about what we saw at SIGGRAPH and what were the cool software and what were the cool pieces of hardware and what were the trends. So we'll kind of do a wrap up of SIGGRAPH tomorrow. Wednesday is going to be 2 hours of Q&A for audio. So we had a couple things move there. So we'll have that there. Thursday, my brother's joining us. So my brother's going to come on. My brother is a ACAM for some pretty big feature films for Steadicam. He has a Trinity rig, which if you do some searches for ARRI Trinity, you'll get a sense of what that is. But it's basically a gimbal that sits on top of a Steadicam, and he does some pretty crazy stuff with both the Steadicam and the Trinity. And he's going to talk about it. We're going to show it to you. Got some wireless transmitters and a bunch of other things. So we're going to show you. He's going to walk you through it a little bit and answer your questions. So I think it should be a really fun Thursday. Friday, of course, we have Friday we have the Zoom update. So the crew, Andy and Jonathan and Sam, will be here to talk about new features coming out in Zoom. We're really always excited. Those are always great great weeks. So this is a really amazing week for us, starting off really well with this team and ending well with the Zoom team. And then we traveled 74,000 miles, 119,000 kilometers. That's 589 million bananas for scale. Thanks again to the panelists. Thanks to the amazing producers. We had a really wide range of people today asking questions. So if you did that and this is the first time you've asked those questions, come back again. It was great questions coming in from our producers. So thank you so much for that. And of course, thank you to the incredible team that we have that is producing all of these in the back end and developing the software in making this all possible. This is not just Zoom. This is like incredible, one of the most complex systems I've ever seen that makes all of this run. And then, of course, we have people managing all of these things, the project management that is making sure that there's a show every day. So we really appreciate everybody's contribution. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Such a cool show. Thank you really all of you for showing up today.
I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I saw all the conversations.
It's just fabulous.
It really, really turned out well. So.
We're going to have to build a skyscraper with all these bananas for scale.
A banana skyscraper. I don't even know.
That would be a fun show, Jason, actually.
Banana paper.
Just hope the bananas don't turn brown and get mushy.
Predation by monkeys.
Sky banana.
Good show, everyone.
That was great. It was really, really good.
Good stuff.